If you buy a house this year, you will pay more in interest than the house is actually worth. You will literally buy the house twice, once for the bank, once for yourself. And nobody is telling you this. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying this because I almost did it myself. I was this close to locking into a 30-year mortgage on a house I couldn't really afford because everyone around me kept saying the same thing. You're throwing money away on rent. Real estate always goes up. It's the American dream. And I believed them. I almost let that pressure push me into a decision that would have financially destroyed me for the next decade. So today we're going to break this down, not with opinions, not with feelings, with the actual numbers that nobody's showing you. Because when you run the math on what it really costs to buy a house in 2026, the answer might shock you. Let's start with the most obvious problem, interest rates. Right now, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate is hovering between 6.5% and 7%. And most people hear that number and think, okay, that's a little high, but it's not that bad. But here's what they don't understand. The difference between a 3% rate and a 7% rate isn't just a little more money per month. It's a completely different financial reality. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Take a house that costs $400,000, a pretty average home in most American cities in 2026. You put down 20%, that's $80,000 out of your pocket before you even move in. So you're financing $320,000 at 3% interest, which is what people were getting in 2020 and 2021. Your monthly payment is about $1,350. Over 30 years, you pay a total of $486,000. So you're paying about $166,000 in interest. That's a lot, but it's manageable. Now run that same loan at 7%. Your monthly payment jumps to $2,130. That's almost $800 more per month. But here's where it gets ugly. Over 30 years at 7%, you pay a total of $767,000. You're paying $447,000 in interest alone. That's more than the price of the house. Let me say that again. At today's rates, you will pay more in interest than the house is actually worth. You're buying the house twice. Once for the bank, once for yourself, and somehow people still think this is a good investment. But DAX rates will come down and I'll just refinance. I hear this everywhere. It's become this coping mechanism that people use to justify overpaying right now. And I get it. I used to think the same way. But let's actually examine this. First, nobody knows when rates will come down. The Federal Reserve has made it very clear that they are not in a hurry. Inflation is still sticky. The economy is sending mixed signals. We could be sitting at 6 to 7% rates for another 2, 3, maybe 5 years. Nobody has a crystal ball. Second, even if rates do drop to 5%, let's say 2 years from now, you've already paid 2 years of interest at 7%. That's over $44,000 in interest payments that you don't get back. And refinancing isn't free. You're paying closing costs again, usually 2 to 3% of the loan. On a $320,000 loan, that's another $6,000 to $10,000. So you've spent over $50,000 on the hope that rates would come down. That's not a strategy. That's a gamble. And you're gambling with the biggest purchase of your life. Now let's talk about something that nobody in real estate wants you to think about. The hidden costs of homeownership. When people compare buying versus renting, they always compare the mortgage payment to the rent payment. That's it. And that comparison is fundamentally dishonest because the mortgage payment is just the beginning. Property taxes in most states, you're paying between 1% and 2% of your home's value every year. On a $400,000 house, that's $4,000 to $8,000 a year. And here's the thing, property taxes almost never go down. They go up every single year. Your city needs more money, your property taxes go up. Your home value increases, your property taxes go up. You have zero control over this number, and it's going to eat into your budget for as long as you own that house. Homeowners insurance, this one has been skyrocketing and nobody's talking about it. In states like Florida, Texas, California, and Louisiana, homeowners insurance has doubled or even tripled in the last few years. Some homeowners are paying $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a year just for insurance. And in some areas, insurance companies are straight up leaving. They're refusing to write new policies because the risk is too high. So you might buy a house and then not even be able to get affordable insurance on it. Maintenance and repairs. The general rule is you should budget 1% to 2% of your home's value per year for maintenance. On a $400,000 house, that's $4,000 to $8,000 a year. And that's just for routine stuff. Yeah, we're talking about the water heater dying, the roof needing replacement, the HVAC system giving out in the middle of July. One major repair can cost you $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 overnight. When you rent, you call the landlord. When you own, you call your savings account. HOA fees. If you're buying in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, and more new developments have them, you're paying anywhere from $200 to $600 a month, sometimes more. And HOAs can raise their fees whenever they want. They can hit you with special assessments. I've seen stories of people getting hit with $10,000 special assessment bills because the HOA decided the building needed a new roof or the parking structure needed repairs. You don't get a vote, you just get a bill. Add all of this up. Mortgage payment 2,130, property taxes 500 a month, insurance 400 a month, maintenance 500 a month, maybe HOA 300 a month. You're looking at $3,800 a month minimum on a $400,000 house. Compare that to renting a similar property for $1,800 to $2,000 a month. The math is not even close, but Dax, at least I'm building equity. This is the big one. The golden argument, the thing everyone says when they can't argue with the numbers. And on the surface, it sounds right. Every mortgage payment builds equity. Rent builds nothing, right? Not exactly. Here's what people miss about equity. For the first 10 years of a 30-year mortgage at 7%, almost all of your payment goes to interest, not principal. In year one of our $320,000 loan at 7%, you pay about $25,500 in total payments. Of that, about $22,000 goes straight to interest. Only $3,500 goes to principal. You're building equity at a rate of less than $300 a month for the first several years. Meanwhile, that $80,000 down payment you made, if you had invested that in a broad market index fund averaging 8 to 10% annual returns, after 10 years that 80,000 becomes 172,000 at 8%, or about 207,000 at 10%. And that $800 a month you're saving by renting instead of buying, if you invested that too at 8% over 10 years, that's about $147,000. So the renter who invested instead of buying could have $319,000 to $354,000 in investments after 10 years. The homeowner has a house that, if they're lucky, appreciated maybe 20 to 30%. That $400,000 house is maybe worth $500,000, but you've paid over $250,000 in mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance during those 10 years. Your actual net gain on the house is significantly less than what the renter built in the stock market. I know this sounds wrong. Everything we've been taught about money says buy a house as soon as you can. But when you actually run these numbers, yeah, and I mean really run them, not the simplified version your real estate agent shows you, renting and investing often wins, especially at 2026 interest rates. Now I want to talk about something even more fundamental, the opportunity cost of home ownership. And this is the part that nobody ever discusses because it's not a number on a spreadsheet. It's about your life. When you buy a house, you're not just making a financial commitment, you're making a geographic commitment. You're saying, I'm going to be in this city, in this neighborhood for at least 5 to 7 years. Because if you sell before that, the transaction costs, realtor fees, closing costs, moving expenses will likely wipe out any equity you've built, and in 2026, that geographic lock-in is more dangerous than ever. Why? Because the job market is changing faster than at any point in modern history. Remote work is reshaping which cities are expensive and which are affordable. AI is eliminating some jobs and creating others in completely different locations. Industries are shifting. What if you buy a house in a city where your industry starts declining? What if a better job opportunity comes up across the country, but you can't take it because you're underwater on your mortgage or you can't sell fast enough? What if the neighborhood changes and property values drop? I watched this happen to my own family. My parents bought a house in what they thought was a great neighborhood. Within 5 years, the area changed. Property values dropped. They were stuck. They couldn't sell without taking a massive loss. They couldn't afford to move. That house became a prison. And I promised myself I would never let a piece of real estate control my life like that. When you rent, you have mobility. You have flexibility. You have the ability to move to where the opportunities are. In a rapidly changing economy, that flexibility has enormous financial value. You just can't put it on a spreadsheet. Let's also address the emotional manipulation that drives most home purchases. The housing industry spends billions of dollars every year convincing you that renting is failure and owning is success. Real estate agents, mortgage brokers, home builders, home improvement stores, they all profit when you buy. So, of course, they want you to believe it's always the right decision. And then there's the social pressure. Your parents asking when you're going to settle down, your friends posting pictures of their new houses on social media, the feeling that you're somehow behind because you don't own property. That pressure is real. I've felt it. But making a $400,000 decision based on what other people think of you is not financial planning. It's financial self-harm. Here's what I want you to understand. I'm not saying nobody should ever buy a house. There are absolutely situations where buying makes sense. If you're in a market where home prices are genuinely affordable relative to income, if interest rates drop significantly, if you have a stable job in a stable industry in a city you want to live in for 10 plus years, if you have enough savings that the down payment doesn't wipe you out. In those situations, buying can be a good move. But in 2026, with 7% interest rates, record high home prices, skyrocketing insurance costs, and an unpredictable economy, for most people, buying a house right now is not building wealth. It's destroying it slowly, month by month, payment by payment, in a way that won't become obvious until years from now when you realize how much further ahead you'd be if you had just rented and invested the difference. The financial industry has convinced an entire generation that the path to wealth starts with a mortgage. But the wealthiest people I know, the ones who actually built real financial freedom, they didn't start by going into debt for 30 years. They started by keeping their expenses low, staying mobile, investing aggressively, and making decisions based on math. Not emotion, not social pressure, not tradition. Your home should be where you live, not your entire financial identity. And if the numbers don't work, and in 2026 for most people they don't, then the smartest financial move you can make is to wait. Keep renting, keep investing, and let everyone else fight over overpriced houses with 7% mortgages while you quietly build real wealth in the background. That's not the American dream they sold you, but it might be the one that actually works. This is Life Audit. I'm Dax, and I'll see you in the next one.